Hello, everyone, and welcome to On the Safe Side, a monthly podcast hosted by the editors of Safety and Health magazine, the official magazine of the National Safety Council. This is Barry Botino, Associate Editor at Safety and Health, and with me, as always, for this jolly December 2024 episode, which is number 58 in our podcast's history, are my fellow Associate Editors, the festive Alan Ferguson and Mr. Decorative Kevin Drewley. How are you, gentlemen?
Jingling all the way, Barry. How about you?
And I'm here in my one-horse open sleigh, Barry.
Glad to hear it, guys. Thank you all for joining us for this podcast, which is sponsored this month by Cintas. Many of you have had a unique journey into the safety profession, and we'd like to hear about it for our My Story feature in the magazine. Submit a personal story or encourage a safety colleague to do so by emailing us at safehealth@nsc.org. Well, when the three of us are not decking the halls, we're bringing you plenty of news from around the safety world. In this month's episode, Kevin will discuss what's in the December issue of Safety and Health magazine in our In This Issue segment. That includes more than a dozen pages of coverage on the OSHA Top 10, complete with a deep dive into each of the most frequently cited standards, a look at the top 10 by region, and interviews with past and present OSHA personnel. We'll also be joined this month by Tim Neubauer, the owner of Exceed Safety, to talk about falls, which has been a constant atop the annual top 10 list in our 5 Questions With segment. And we'll get you caught up on some of the news you might have missed while celebrating the season in our In Case You Missed It segment. For the last time in 2024, is everybody ready? Well, then let's go.
We're discussing the December issue of Safety and Health, which of course means the presence of in-depth coverage of OSHA's top 10 most frequently cited standards for fiscal year 2024. While you might know that Fall Protection General Requirements 1926-501 is OSHA's most frequently cited standard for the 14th straight fiscal year, there's plenty of insight and analysis inside the data, including the top 5 cited subparts of each standard, as well as a breakdown of the top 10 by OSHA region and industry code. There's a look at the agency's 10 highest proposed monetary penalties, aka the penalty box, as well as an exclusive sit-down with Scott Ketchum, director of OSHA's Directorate of Enforcement Programs. You might recall that Scott presented the data at the NSC Safety Congress and Expo in September. The issue also includes a feature story that Barry wrote covering the concept of selling safety to leadership. In the story, a panel of 4 safety experts offer unique insights into several questions, including the following. How do you define selling safety? How closely is selling safety tied to an organization's culture? What methods do you recommend for selling safety to leaders? And who are some allies safety pros can look to gain support? You can find our coverage in your mailbox or online at safetyandhealthmagazine.com.
Providing first aid and safety supplies for your employees is crucial to your business's success. That's why more than 280,000 businesses rely on Cintas First Aid and Safety as their trusted single-source provider. From first aid kits to AEDs, Cintas' trained service professionals help keep your workplace safe and your employees productive so you can focus on what you do best. Ready to elevate your workplace safety? Visit Cintas.com to learn more.
It's no surprise that falls remain the leading cause of death in construction and are a major concern in numerous other industries. As we mentioned near the start of this episode, Fall Protection General Requirements has been OSHA's most frequently cited standard for 14 straight fiscal years, while its Fall Protection Training Requirement standard is a perennial entry in the agency's top 10. In this installment of 5 Questions With, Tim Neubauer, president and owner of Exceed Safety LLC in Raleigh, North Carolina, offers his perspectives on falls and fall protection as employers and workers aim to mitigate the issue. Tim, we thank you for joining us on the Safe Side today.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
You are most welcome. Well, just to get into it, why are falls such a persistent problem?
It is a convoluted answer. I will try and summarize it and then get into some detail. In most cases, I'm going to link it to human behavior. People simply don't see risk in it. It's what's acceptable level of danger. Everybody says, "Hey, I'm smarter than the other guy. I won't fall. It won't happen to me." It's George Carlin, a famous comedian, once said, "Everybody who drives faster than me is crazy. Everybody who drives slower than me is stupid." So the only driver on the road that was safe was George. And I would use that same analogy when it comes to safety. Everybody says, I'm not so dumb as to fall, and I know what I'm doing. And I always affectionately call it FFY syndrome. I've been doing this for 40 freaking years. So it won't happen to me. My dad did it. If I wear fall protection, I'll go out of business. That mentality is pervasive, especially in the construction world, and it's so hard to break that at a high level. I'm going to kind of tick down a little list of reasons why I think that people don't wear fall protection or cut corners, and they don't have the fall protection equipment available. And when I say available, I want to talk about the world of instant gratification. I'm not going to walk back to my truck to grab my harness because it's 10 steps the wrong way, and that's 20 steps round trip. So I'm simply not going to do it. We've got to break that mentality that the equipment is available or the truck's late and I'm going to get it done. Poorly maintained equipment. I on a regular basis, Kevin, I see your harness and lanyard ends up in the back of your truck or in the back of your van, and then they throw stuff on top of it, and then you try to pull it out without moving the stuff on top, so it's poorly maintained and damaged. People think it's okay to work next to the edge because, again, I won't fall. And this is going to be my biggest drumbeat as to answer your question is training is not effective and it's inadequate. Sitting through a 30-minute video on why you should wear fall protection is not going to make them follow the rule. They, in general, fall protection training is ineffective. I don't want to say inadequate, and I don't want to say that it's bad training, but if it doesn't actually link to the person's emotional connector, then it's just going through the training cycle. I sat there for 30 minutes. I passed a 10-question test. Therefore, I'm now a competent person for training. And that really is, to me, one of the bigger drum beats is they don't have effective training. The other one is basically unstable working surfaces. I can stand in a bucket. I can stand on a barrel. I'm only going to do this for a second. I can jump up on the desk and get that. It's a huge one. Ladders. It blows my mind the technology today with all of the ladders and and in, and the advancing of technology and ladder that we're still using the wrong ladder or standing in the top of that ladder. Probably the biggest one here next to training is there's always a hurry to get the job done, to be under the time limit assigned. And I'm going to go back to leadership, where leadership plays a big role in here. Is you might tell the workers to hurry up and get the job done, but they feel the stress of hurrying to get the job done. And that's why they're not wearing their fall protection. That's why they won't walk back to the truck. That's why they're standing on the top step of the ladder. And it's just pressure in general to get the job done. And they make a decision, a poor decision, to not wear fall protection. And then finally is that management is not doing hazard assessments and job site inspections on a regular basis. Those are my top 8 or 9 reasons why I say that it's still a problem. And it comes back down to leadership and training 100% of the time, in my opinion, Kevin. I know that was a long answer to a short question.
Well, Tim, OSHA's standard on fall protection general requirements, which is 1926.501, is well known to our audience and it's frequently cited. Its standard on fall protection systems criteria and practices, which is 1926.502, spells out more about alternative fall protection plans. Could you take us through those standards and how they're related and maybe give us some key takeaways for employers?
Sure. First of all, the alternative fall protection plan really only applies to 2 industries in sub-industries inside of construction. Precast concrete construction falls under 501B12. That is a very small world. And then the next standard, B13, is about residential construction. Okay. Those are only 2 times that an alternative fall protection plan would actually be applicable. And then to make this a little more convoluted, OSHA actually put out a letter of clarification in 2002 where they had a policy of what you can do and how you could do it, and then they rescinded that a couple of years later, and it's actually standard 3-0.1A. They rescinded it, but people still find that thing on the internet, and they say, here's my permission to not have a follow fall protection because I can use an alternative fall protection plan. Even though at the top of that website from OSHA, it says this is an archival document, it does not reflect what the current standard is. So you've got those 2 or 3 actual items here, is that we're only talking about the world of precast concrete and residential construction. If you're not in those 2 areas, then the alternative fall protection plan literally does not apply to you. And the archival document saying, hey, it does apply, has been rescinded, and it's been rescinded for more than a decade or more. So anybody who says, I've been doing this for a long time, that document's gone and been gone for a long, long time. So one of the things we need to talk about is specifically 501 actually says that if you're going to use an alternative fall protection plan, there's a presumption that it is feasible. And this is where a lot of companies get in trouble when they start talking about feasibility. And there's actually I won't mention the specific case to out that employer, but in the 1990s, a large auto manufacturer made a presumption that they couldn't do something because of cost effectiveness, and OSHA's litigation with them, successful litigation with that large auto manufacturer, was that the money is not a factor. So simply saying, I can't do this, it's infeasible because it would put me out of business and cost too much money, is not a valid argument. And I see this on a regular basis with our clients, guys, is our clients come and say, if I had to do blah, I would be out of business. And my comeback to them is, money is not a feasibility defense. You're smart people, you own businesses, you manage people, come up with a solution to the problem, and money is not a qualifier to saying it's infeasible. The other thing is they simply say it's infeasible for me to provide fall protection. It's infeasible for me to put a guardrail up. If you're going to use an alternative fall protection plan, the burden is on you, and this is in the standard. The burden is upon the employer to establish that it is infeasible and appropriate to use an alternative fall protection plan. And I can give you a laundry list of reasons why you have to address. So you have to come in and say, why can't I use a guardrail? And then have a non-financial argument of a guardrail won't be possible because of, and then list all of the reasons. And then you have to deal with safety nets. And I could go through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I can go through the 9 sections in 502 that apply and say, here's why I can't use scaffolding. Here's why I can't use a boom lift. Here's why I can't hang from a crane. You have to go through every single one of those to make an argument of why you can use an alternative fall protection plan. I do want to correct myself when I talked about that there's that 502 or 501B12 and B13 is precast and residential. If you're doing leading edge work, that's another time you could actually use alternative fall protection plan. I didn't mention that. That's actually 501B2. I skipped over that when I was talking earlier. So when we're talking about the 3 examples where we can use alternative fall protection plan, it's still a very small scope, but you do have a huge burden of saying, it's infeasible because, and then come up with a real reason, not based on money, not based on productivity, not based on time constraints. So you have to be able to demonstrate that it's infeasible. It creates a greater hazard. Now, that's something else I want to introduce is if I wear a harness and landing around a unguarded moving piece of equipment and you come back and you say, hey, I can't wear fall protection because I could get pulled into this machinery, you're going to have to identify why you can't guard that machine and why you can't turn it off while you're doing the operation. Again, these are really, really high bars for you to say, I'm not going to use conventional fall protection. I'm going to go to this alternate plan. The last thing that I want to talk about on that specific thing right there is you have to make it specific to each and every job site. So if I say I can't build this or use fall protection on building A, that does not give you permission to not wear fall protection on building B. You have to go back and revisit each and every one of those and why. And if I can use fall protection on the west end, but I can't use it on the east end, I have to identify that and put that in my plan that we're going to use conventional fall protection on the west end of a building, but not on the east end. And here's why. So very, very complicated. This is not a one-page document. This isn't off the top of your head why you can and can't do that. Moving on from there, I want to talk about the plan has to be prepared by a qualified person. Now, OSHA defines qualified and competent very clearly in the standard, but not in fall protection. It's farther up in the standard. A qualified person is degree, certificate, professional standing. Now, folks, I'm an expert witness. I do this in court. I do this with OSHA. A master's degree and 3 decades of experience sometimes gets challenged by lawyers. That am I qualified, degree, certificate, professional standing, and they always go after professional standing. And heaven help you if you're on the wrong end of that and you say I've been doing this for 40 years, because just remember you got somebody like me sitting on the other side. I'm going to poke holes in, hey, what does 502K3 mean to you? And then you have to argue that out from there off the top of your head. And if you're not capable of doing that, you don't have the professional standing. So to me, when you say qualified person, a degree, certificate are going to be your 2 best defenses. And even then, those aren't very good. And then professional standing is probably the weakest leg to stand on. And this is where we see the local construction companies, the small time players who say, I've been doing this for a long time and I've written this plan before. That doesn't make it you an expert on that situation or that you're a qualified person that can address this to OSHA. And it has to be approved by that qualified person. And it's a living document so that when you get to the job site, if things change, you have to have that qualified person come back and amend it from there. A copy of the fall protection plan actually has to be on the job site. And the supervisor needs to be familiar with the plan. So now we move beyond the qualified person, and we're talking about the supervisors on site have to know what the plan is and how to enforce the rules. Actually, I just had a client call me up this morning before we started recording this, and they have a plan. They were doing leading edge work up in Virginia for a maintenance system, and they had alternative fall protection plan, and 2 workers encroached too close to the edge, and they were observed by OSHA, and citations are in the works for them right now. In this case, the supervisor may or may not have effectively communicated the plan to the 2 workers who walked up close to the edge. So it has to be on site and available, and the supervisor has to know it, and in turn, they have to be able to communicate that to workers so they actually understand. So that's just kind of a high rundown of what 502 is talking about and 501, and knowing that you have to address each and every reason why fall protection can't be used. I hope that answered your question. I know it was a very long, convoluted walk down through about 8-9 pages of the standard.
So, Tim, speaking of plans, which components should employers consider when developing and implementing fall protection plans?
You want to consider every variable, literally. For instance, there's passive and there's active fall restraint and fall arrest systems. So whenever possible, there's something called the hierarchy of control. When you identify a hazard, how do you want to fix it? And too many times people say we're fall protection, the personal fall arrest system, personal fall restraint system, and those are actually active, which puts it in my court. I have to put the harness on. I have to tie it to the right thing. That puts a lot of responsibility on me, the worker. But what I want to do is the passive one where, can I put a guardrail up? And those are ones where I don't have to think. And that's an engineering control. I want to go over engineering controls. I want to change the work process. Do I actually have to be on that roof? Do I actually have to be in that confined area doing that service work? Do I have to physically be there? That's my elimination. Can I change our process? And my running joke is, can we do it with a drone? Because if I can sit in my truck and fly the drone up there to inspect the roof, do I really need to be up there? That's rethinking how we do things, and sometimes that's difficult for people to consider. Can we not be up there? Can I change the process? Can there be a guardrail up there? And if the answer to all that stuff is yes, then why are we up there and wearing that? The other one is safety nets, and for me, with the NSC being based in Chicago and with the global reach, there's higher buildings that use safety nets. Where I live in the Mid Atlantic, we don't see safety nets between New York and Miami. There's just not a big need for them. But those are things to consider. Can we use a safety net? There's actually a municipality here in North Carolina where I'm based that requires safety nets around scaffolding, but sometimes that scaffolding is only 18 feet tall and it's infeasible. So we have to address that with them on an individual basis. Again, personal fall arrest systems are something that is a last line of defense. I try to do the work where I don't have to wear them. Positioning devices could be keeping you in place. Don't really like talking about them because everybody goes back to the days of the body belts and the pole climbers running up and the tree climbers. And I don't want those to be pervasive outside of those very, very narrow windows. They also want to talk about controlled access zones. So we talk about controlled access zones from one aspect of don't get too close to the edge. But I also want to take that into the next level of don't let anybody be underneath you. Controlled access underneath me is where if I drop something, falling object protection, which is a huge, huge consideration, but I want to have people underneath me. So controlled access zone where you're working and underneath you. And to me, one of the least effective ones is a warning line, which is, hey, don't cross this line or bad things will happen. You're asking for the worker to not walk over a red line in the ground, and safety monitors too. In today's world, guys, if I tell you to sit around and watch that line, don't let anybody cross that line, what are you doing within 30 seconds? You're checking your Facebook, you're updating your social media, you're texting your significant other, you're ordering things on Amazon, so you're not doing your job. So to me, that monitors and warning lines are two very, very ineffective methods to use. So covers or a close guardrail, all those need to be considerations when you're developing your fall protection plan. Is how are we going to keep people safe, and how can I do it with the least amount of effort from the workers who are exposed, not putting responsibility on them. To me, there's a great graphic that's in a lot of training material where they talk about the hierarchy of control, and the highest level is engineering, substitution, change of work process, but it's the least involved with the worker. And then when you get down all the way down to the last line of defense is PPE, and it involves the worker the most. So I want to take that out of their head. Now I'll give you guys a real true story. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Omaha at the Strategic Air Command Museum. And I always use a joke: you can't stop Bubba from putting his finger in the hole. You can't. And so that's an analogy: is you want to take some concepts away from the workers and engineer the process out. So I'm at the Strategic Air Command, and they have the Apollo space capsule mock-up that they would drop in the water to practice pulling it out of the water with the ships when the Apollo program was going on. And in the sides of this space capsule, they have holes drilled to let water in and out when they're picking it up. And there I am, the safety guy, 3 decades of experience. I walk up to the machine, I walk up to the capsule, and there's a hole in it. So what's the first thing that I do? Put my finger in the hole. And I created my own nightmare scenario because I had a flashlight in one hole and my finger in the other, looking to see what was inside this capsule right over there. So again, take things out of the worker's decision-making process whenever possible and put guardrails in and things like that to prevent them from putting their finger in the hole or walking over the line because I'm only going to do it for a second and nothing bad will happen to me. Going back to my original theme of everybody says it won't happen to me. Another long answer to a short question.
Here's a little bit shorter question. You wrote this year that in construction, quote, safeguarding the lives of workers is not just a regulatory mandate, but is also a moral obligation, unquote. What has brought you to that point of view?
I have worked in a for-profit world for my entire career. And early on, I made I had an epiphany, and I said, when you put money versus safety in somebody's purview, they're always going to choose their paycheck over their safety. It's a balance in there that we all have to make money, because if we're not making money, the company closes doors. We don't have to worry about safety. We're all out of a job. When you give a business person or a worker that balance, they're always going to make the wrong decision of money. And I wrote an article years and years and years ago called "Safety First Doesn't Work," because the safety is a priority. Priorities change. I don't know about you folks, but I've been married for 41 years to the same woman. And I will wake up every Saturday morning and I have a list of priorities of things that Tim wants to do. And then my wife wakes up an hour later and my priorities change. and it goes back to work. You come in and everybody says safety is a priority. Well, is it number one priority? Making money is your number one. Production is your number one priority. And then somebody gets hurt, and all of a sudden safety becomes the highest priority. And then you shut the plant down, and you do all this investigation, and you do the root causal, and you do all this training. And then you say, oh my gosh, we're behind schedule. We have product delivery. Let us go ahead. And all of a sudden safety takes a lower priority, and we're back up to production. And that conflict needs to change. And so what I started coming up with is safety is a value. I am unwilling to do anything if it means getting hurt or killed. I'm unwilling to tell any of my employees to do anything that is unsafe to get them hurt or killed. And when I convince people that it is our moral obligation, our value to work safely, then it's okay to say, hey, I run a for-profit company. I absolutely run a for-profit company. And I tell my clients the exact same thing. It's okay to be profitable, but not at the expense of safety. To make a bigger analogy on the values of this, most of us were taught not to lie, cheat, or steal as a small child. We didn't become thieves at 30. We stole pennies from our mom's purse when we were 3. Those kind of values are instilled in us from a young age. And in America, in general, we want it now economy. We are a service, and we want now, fast moving. And that is in conflict with let's do it safe. And we can gain values as adults. If as a single person we had values, and then we get married, and then our values become blended with our significant other, so values change. You want to talk about values changing, have a child, and your priorities and values change in a hurry from going out in your younger days when we're all hooting and hollering and doing crazy stuff and going out partying, and all of a sudden 7 o'clock is a great bedtime because your values have changed. We're now interested in taking care of our children. Same thing with safety. We need to have that cultural shift where safety is a moral obligation, not an add-on to our product. I have dozens of clients spanning 3 decades that have bought this, and they are highly successful. They are profitable, and they do it with safety as part of their culture and their moral obligation rather than a regulatory mandate. The OSHA is the rock bottom minimum, folks. Imagine this. You follow OSHA rules to not get a citation or a ticket. That is the goal of that. You are safe because you want your employees to go home at night to their families. That is a moral obligation. And that was a huge shift for me. And I was very thankful that at that point in my career, I worked for a company that actually hired me the week after they killed an employee. And the owner said to me, Tim, I'm a business guy through and through. I'm a tier 1 athlete, say played semi-pro sports, but I got to tell you, if I ever hurt somebody like this again or kill somebody, I never want to do another day's work. I will shut my company down. I'll go out of business. I can't live like this. And he struggled with that moving from profit bearing to the moral obligation, but he got there. And 6 years after that, when I left that company, they were winning national awards and extremely profitable, and the company had grown astronomically. So it was a case in point of you can be morally safe and still be regulatory compliant and profitable.
Well, Tim, as we wrap up today, are there other takeaways or resources about fall protection and fall prevention that you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure. Not wanting to do a flagrant pitch for my company, let me speak in general. When you read the OSHA standard, just know that you're reading something, and you might think, hey, I know It says I have to be feasible or infeasible. And if you don't go and do the extra step of what is feasible and infeasible and read about the court cases that have set those precedences and read all the letters of clarification, you're going to find yourself deficient. So I'm going to advise you to get a safety professional that is experienced in that world, that knows the regulations, and make sure that that person's, I'm going to say, reputable. I have seen safety people who will disappear when the situation gets real. So make sure you pick somebody who's got that track experience when you're developing these plans. When you're looking at what can we do for fall protection, find a reputable, experienced safety professional who knows fall protection and the industry in general that you're talking to. So if you're dealing with scaffold, find yourself an actual scaffold safety expert. Make sure they're not tied to selling you a product or a process. You know, so that you're getting unvarnished advice on there. That to me is the biggest takeaway: is make sure that you get competent advice. You can read through this stuff, but you're going to spend hundreds of hours trying to find what does qualified versus competent mean. What does certificate mean? What does certified mean? Make sure that you're getting competent advice on that stuff, so you're not going to expose yourself or your employees to the wrong situation. That would be my final takeaway.
All right, Tim. Well, no, you've given us quite a few takeaways. We truly appreciate and thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with our audience. And again, appreciate you joining us here on the Safe Side.
Thank you so much for having me.
With all the holiday shopping and December activities, who could blame you if you missed some of the news from around the safety world? That's why we're here with In Case You Missed It, and I'll start. I'm doing something a little different here, and I'll highlight one of my stories from 2018 titled Unmaking a Rule. And with a new administration coming in, one likely focused on deregulation, this story is a good primer on how that process works. Hint, it's pretty much the same process as issuing regulations. And one highlight from that story is that agencies have to provide a sound rationale on why they want to make a change. The key phrase in the law that governs regulations, the Administrative Procedure Act, is arbitrary and capricious. To translate, the agencies can't promulgate or repeal regulations just on a whim. They have to give a reasoned explanation on why they want to do something, because invariably many agencies face legal challenges to their actions, whether regulatory or deregulatory. So if OSHA said in the past that its silica law will save lives and prevent cases of silicosis, et cetera, it's got to show why those facts have changed if they want to repeal that regulation. So barring changes into the law, that's what we're looking at going forward. Kevin, how about you?
Well, really, unless Gale Force winds both swept your December issue from your hands and left you without internet for weeks, it's likely our coverage of the OSHA Top 10 did not escape your notice. But I did want to take just a moment to call attention to some of the new wrinkles in the annual spread to make sure you didn't miss them in print or online. As is so often discussed, we know and OSHA knows that the numbers don't change much, but we again try to add some additional content just to make things fresh for readers. So first, there is a capsule that highlights, in addition to the top 10 seminar itself, which was a presentation from our NSC cohorts, Mark Chung and Ken Kolash, highlighting the injuries behind the fines. And with Ken emphasizing that the BLS data presented is not a one-to-one relationship, that presentation offered figures as examples of injuries that might be associated with OSHA violations. The other was a glance at perspectives from Richard Fairfax, who spent 34 years at OSHA and had spent about the past 10 as a consultant with several organizations, including for National Safety Council. Richard also is a friend of the podcast, as you might remember. I know he's got a long and decorated career, but his feral hog story on this very program is always one that I'm going to remember. But it so happened that Rich, again, he retired from OSHA a while ago, a little more than a decade ago, but he also has since decided to step down from his consulting role. And in step with that, and in step with something he had said to our editor, Melissa Rominsky, just about the top 10 and its impact and its place in the show and his very history with it, we wanted to do a little bit of a sidebar. So those perspectives from Rich are interesting because he, in fact, was the first OSHA presenter with this seminar. He talked about kind of the humble beginnings where it was performed as almost even an underground thing where it was not highlighted in either the show program or the magazine, and he was presenting to maybe a handful of people using overhead projector slides. And then you can imagine that imagery now. If you've attended the seminar, you know what it is today. It's always shoulder to shoulder. It's been in ballrooms in years past, but no matter the venue, there's always the interest there. So it was nice to talk with Rich. And at the time we talked, we didn't realize that he was stepping down, but again, it just worked out in step with that. So discussing this briefly is also another chance to highlight another of the Kolash clan at NSC, and that's library manager Elena Kolash, who is instrumental in helping just do some of the, point me in the right direction and do some research herself with just Safety and Health's first mentions of top 10 coverage and the seminar, and also with the show program. So again, those are some new things with the top 10 in your magazine this month. Barry, what stood out to you?
Kevin, I'm really grateful that you mentioned the news story you had in there in the coverage about Richard Fairfax, who has been a great resource to the three of us during his time here at NSC. And I often, when reading your story, I thought about just how this was like fourth grade math class when Richard was presenting OSHA Top 10 on an overhead projector, and just to think how far it's come to today when we're in a giant ballroom in a major convention center in a big city, I think is really cool to really appreciate how far it's come and how important it is. So, I wanted to share today, guys. An item that I wrote for safetyandhealthmagazine.com. And it's something that's affecting a lot of us and even our team members here at NSC, and that's caregiving for family members and just the amount of toll that it's taking on workers. And the study out of Chicago said that 1 out of 5 workers who take a leave of absence to care for someone else end up taking a leave for a medical condition of their own. And I thought that was pretty striking. And among the workers who leave less than 2 years after caring for others, according to this study, 15% cited mental health as the most common reason, while 11% left for a surgery. So it was a really interesting study, and 77% of adult caregivers who were surveyed said they were either not prepared or only somewhat prepared to support a team member who was struggling with their own caregiving role. So I wanted to just share that with you guys, and I think that's something that is really impacting a lot of teams these days.
Is there something you want to make sure we didn't miss? Email us at safehealth@nsc.org.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this month's episode of On the Safe Side. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you spending some of it with us, whether you're listening at work, at home, in the car, or even at the gym. Big thanks to our sponsor this month, Cintas. You can learn more about them by visiting their website, cintas.com. We also encourage you to visit our website, safetyandhealthmagazine.com/podcasts, to check out any of our past episodes, and that includes episode 28, which focuses on inexperienced workers and housekeeping tips. The original music for this podcast was composed by Steve Maslin. Thank you so much, Steve. And a big thank you goes out to all of our NSC colleagues behind the scenes who make this podcast go. We'll be back next month to have more safety-related discussions, talk to trusted voices from around the profession, and hopefully make you smile a little. In the meantime, please stay on the safe side.